I want to welcome you all here, and thank you for spending a part of this glorious Saturday afternoon with us. We finally have some beautiful weather, and you chose to be here celebrating with us, so thank you for your time. We're here today. Today is our official kickoff for the summer reading program for the New Bedford libraries, and we're doing the event here at the Whaling Museum, and we're very thankful for them for donating their space to us, because we anticipated a big group, and our building, our meeting room only has a capacity for 100. And yeah, we would have had to cram you into that space. So thank you to the Whaling Museum. It's a great venue for us to do this here. So this year we celebrate 50 years of the moon landing. And with that in mind, the statewide theme for the summer reading program is a universe of stories. And with that theme in mind, I was approached by my team at the main library about possible programs for their summer. And one of the ideas that came out was, hey, listen, we heard that NASA has a Lone and Astronaut program. And you think we could borrow one? And I thought, well, we need a little bit more research on that. So we did, and they came to me and they said, no, seriously, there is a program where we can connect with NASA, apply, give them our data, give them the information about our community, and a request will go out to the astronauts who might be interested in presenting at schools or libraries in the area of their interest. So weren't we lucky that we did find someone? So, but more on him later. Since the library budget is it's municipally appropriated, the whole budget is operational only. It's just keep the lights on, keep the heat on for the staff to be there. So we rely on donors, donations, grants to have money to do any form of library program. And for this particular program, we were very fortunate that we have somebody who were great friends to the New Bedford Library and great friends to the New Bedford community for many years, and now have joined me in my quest to bring quality educational programs to New Bedford and to our kids, and to inspire lifelong learning, whether you're 3 or 4 or whether you're in your 70s and still want to learn more about the world around us. So in response to the question of can we get the astronaut, my question to them was, great, how are we going to get the money? There's just no money in the budget. And they said, well, that's your responsibility. We come up with the ideas, you come up with the money. And I said, okay, I got this. I think I know who to invite out for coffee. And I did. I reached out to a wonderful friend, Miss Deborah Baker of Baker Books, and with her and Ben's tremendous support, the Bakers, through their Enable Hope Foundation, supplied us with the money for this event today. So I'm going to... Seriously, we did the work, but it would not be possible if it wasn't for their generosity, and I'm forever thankful and grateful for them. And I will go out for coffee with you at the Baker. Time for us to stop talking about next year. So anyway, with that, housekeeping out of the way, I just wanted to give a shout out to one of our city councilors who's here today, City Councilor Joe Lopes. Joe today, but he is a city councilor, and he's a great supporter and friend of the library and the programs that we do, so I wanted you all to know that as well. The mayor unfortunately wasn't able to be here with us through some other commitments, but he wanted me to express his thank you to all of you for being here and for your continued support of the library as well. He's also a great supporter of the initiatives we have at the libraries. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to turn it over to Bethany, our children's librarian. She will talk a little bit about the summer reading program. I know you're all dying to hear about Stephen, but this is about our summer reading program. So I'm going to ask her to do a little talk about what we're doing for the summer with the kids. She could do better at explaining it than I can. So I'll turn over the floor to Bethany.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Bethany. I'm the Youth Services Coordinator right up the street at the main library. And this summer, as Olivia said, is our Universe of Stories summer reading program. We're celebrating the 50th anniversary for the first man on the moon. So we're very excited. We have so many programs packed at all of the 5 locations. So when you sign up for our summer reading program, we have a sign-up party this Wednesday at 4. When you register, you get a raffle ticket. Every week we would be doing raffles for every registered person. We also have all ages participating for the bingos that we're going to be doing. So there's different age groups. This year we changed it up a little. We noticed that we're getting more and more babies and toddlers, which is beautiful to see. We have a big generation coming in, and we included an early learner bingo. So that's activities for kids to do with parents and for guardians to have some different learning activities to do. We also have the child and teen bingo as well. And then for adults, we have lots of programs for you too. Right, so we also have the programming. We have about,
We have a lot going on.
we have a lot going on. We've been very busy. We have probably 20 different performers this year. From the first mime on the moon, we have exotic pets. If you like farm babies, if you want to interact with different, we have a mime on the moon coming. We have a lot to.
Yeah, so check your local listings. Go to our website, our calendar of events is there. Stop in at any branch location. We've got a newsletter that you're all welcome to sign up for where we send you all this information a month ahead, so you can plan accordingly. But every location is open and can give you the information. Just call the library that you're closest to.
So all of our programs that we're going to have this summer, we don't want to hear kids say that they're bored this summer. We have lots of programs going on, and they're all free. So we do know that camp is expensive, and we really want people to bring their families back to the library. We have a lot going on for you. And be sure to also check out our Verbial app. That's also a great way to get reminders of what's going on each week. And thank you again for everyone coming out. It's a great audience.
So now I want to introduce you to the person who's responsible for most of this, and coming up with an idea of the astronaut. But we do have some staff that are big NASA fans, so I think this germinated as a discussion they might be having at the desk. And so I'm going to turn the floor over to Amy Ferguson, our reference librarian, and she can talk to you about Stephen, and then we'll turn the floor over to Stephen.
Today I have the pleasure of introducing NASA astronaut Captain Stephen Bowen. I'm going to tell you just a brief thing about him. I'm going to look down a lot because he's done so much. It's going to be hard for me to get through it. So Captain Bowen was the first submarine officer to be selected as an astronaut by NASA. Captain Bowen is a veteran of STS-126, STS-132, and STS-133. The STS-126 mission was the 27th International Space Station Assembly mission. The crew delivered equipment and supplies, as well as expanded the living quarters to house 6 crew members aboard ISS, the International Space Station. STS-132 delivered an integrated cargo carrier and a Russian mini research module. STS-133 delivered the permanent multi-purpose module and the 4th Express Logistics carrier to the station. He has logged more than 40 days in space, including 47 hours and 18 minutes and 7 spacewalks. Captain Bowen is also the first American to fly on back-to-back space missions. So, pleased to introduce the impressive.
So contrary to what she said, I do realize that y'all just came in to get out of the rain because it's pouring outside. But I'm going to keep you trapped here. Maybe I'll get done before it stops raining and the sun comes out, but we'll see. So summer reading. So I'm going to start along those lines. Hopefully this works. Yeah. So I'm in this picture. Yes, I am. All right, I'll ask one person. All right, so raise a hand. You. Which one? Which shirt? Which position? The top left, the two blue shirts, and there's a stripy guy in the middle. Which are the blue shirts?
The one all the way to
Nah, the stripy guy in the middle is me with the crew cut and the rugby shirt. Yeah, so that's me. That's between 5th and 6th grade. And you can see some of these things have changed. These people, a lot of them are still around. Mr. Levine, who was our school teacher, our 6th grade teacher, he retired probably about 10 years ago now. But this is 1975. And so in 1975, they were raising the price of stamps. Some of these kids probably don't know what stamps are. Yeah, so on an envelope, if you drop it in the US mail, you put this thing called a stamp. And they used to have this thing before they came up with forever stamps. They actually had a price on them. And the price was going from 12 cents to 13 cents or 11 cents to 12 cents, some ridiculous amount like that, which I'm sure we protested about and got upset over. But they had a contest for designing stamps. So school kids all across the country submitted ideas for stamps. And I distinctly remember that I submitted a picture of the Apollo-Soyuz Program. And that was the first time the Russians and Americans worked together in space. They came together, they docked in space, they exchanged crew members for a couple of days, and they separated and came home. But it just, when I thought about that and I think about this picture, I realized that at the time, flying in space was big news. You know, we had walked on the moon. I had seen us walk on the moon as a 5-year-old in my living room in Cohasset. And you know, we had done that. We had flown back to the moon several times. We had done the Skylab program. Apollo-Soyuz, the next thing was the space shuttle, and I followed the space shuttle. But it also makes me think about school. And so I was not necessarily the best of students as a small child. As a matter of fact, in 1st grade, I distinctly remember my teacher, and this is the good old days, so teachers did things like this. Teacher said to me, "Steve, you are in the lowest reading group." It's like, okay, I don't want to be in the lowest reading group. So I was probably a little stubborn, but I was fairly motivated. And so, but from the beginning of the year to the end of the year, I learned how to read really well. I moved up from the lowest reading group to the highest reading group, and I found out I really, really enjoy reading. And that same year, well, actually before that, my mother had got me a library card, and at Paul Pratt Memorial Library in Cohasset. And then for my 7th birthday, this is the first book I ever owned, The Pig War. My wife did not want me to put this picture in there because she doesn't think it's a very good book. However, it's actually a true story. And there's a bit of history to this. So it actually took place up in Seattle, up in Washington State, and the border with Vancouver. You should read about it because it involves how meetings are run and the Galveston seawall. So look up the Pig War, Vancouver, Seattle, Vancouver and the Washington border, and you'll understand why that book actually is significant. But anyway, so that was my first book I ever owned. But I've read a lot, you know, important books like Hockey Stars of 1971 with that guy there. War of the Worlds, I've read that 3 times already in my lifetime. I keep coming back to it. It's sort of a recurring thing. But I was reading a lot, and I actually always participated in my summer reading programs at my library because you got a free book at the time if you read a certain number of books through the summer. And so I always wanted to win, and so I always read a lot of books. And I really enjoyed it, and I continue to read a lot even to this day. But it all started with a teacher telling me, "Steve, you're in the lowest reading group." So one of the other things I learned was that there's some reason these teachers are teaching you stuff. So you guys, when you're in a classroom, the teacher's not just up there talking for themselves. They're actually trying to impart information that might be important. And you should pay attention somewhat. So what I learned was, if I didn't understand what the teacher was saying, I asked questions, and I worked a little harder in some of those subjects. So through the years in school, I managed to do pretty well. So when I was getting ready to graduate from high school, I kind of got to pick where I wanted to go to school and what I wanted to study. And so I grew up in a small town up the road, Cohasset, my dad laid tile for a living, so going to college was a big deal. He never went to college, but carrying buckets of cement was my alternative, and I did not think that was a great alternative. So I went to the U.S. Naval Academy and studied electrical engineering. And I followed the same thing there. Every time I had a subject I wasn't doing it quite well, I put a little more time in there, and I did well enough that I got to choose what I wanted to do when I graduated from the Naval Academy. And I chose to go into the submarine force. And I spent 14 years in the submarine force. And that was a fantastic career. I was really enjoying it. They sent me to graduate school. I got a degree from Woods Hole and MIT. And things were growing great. But then the opportunity came up that I could apply to be an astronaut. So becoming an astronaut's not like these other things where you get to choose. As a matter of fact, this last class, we chose 12 people, but there were 18,000 applicants. And so we sorted through. I read about 800 of them. And I kept saying, thank heaven I didn't apply this year. Thank heaven I didn't apply this year. And it's just amazing. So you don't feel like you deserve it when you become an astronaut. You feel very fortunate and very lucky to have that opportunity presented to you. And so I've been very grateful to have the opportunity to be an astronaut for the past 19 years. And so that's what I've done for 19 years. That's me on the job right there. And so I was selected in 2000, in the class of 2000. Oh, forgot to mention this. This is what I did before becoming an astronaut. Those are my boats. I like them too. Yeah, they're good. But, so I was selected in the class of 2000. And when you're selected to be an astronaut, the first 2 years of your career, you're called an ASCAN. Not a term of endearment, but astronaut candidate. After 2 years, if you make it all the way through, and most people do, because they've been pretty selective up front, you're qualified or eligible to be assigned to a space mission. When I was selected in 2000, there were 135 astronauts. And when we got after 2 years, we were able to support station sims, shuttle sims, studying our Russian. But there were some things, that we still hadn't studied. We hadn't done our robotics qualifications. We haven't done our EVA qualifications. Now we roll that all into those first couple years, because there's only 42 astronauts now. So everybody is very critical, and assignments, even though your assignments are still stretched out over years and years, you're very important to the process at a very early stage as a new astronaut nowadays. So I was an astronaut for 7 years before I was assigned to my very first space flight, STS-124, which is not this flight, because I got kicked off of STS-124 because they changed the manifest for the space station. So one of those other things you have to learn as an astronaut is things change. You know, I've been assigned to 6 space missions, and I've flown on 3. And I'm happy I didn't fly one of them, and the other 2, it's okay. I got 3 others. So it works out pretty well. But that changes, that dynamic, being a part of a team, understanding what your role is really important. It's important in life to know to know how to support what's going on, to know how to contribute to whatever team you're a part of, whether it just be your community or your baseball team. We're all sort of a giant team here on Earth. And so my first mission, STS-126, was assigned in September of 2007, and we flew November 2008. And on this flight, gives you a sense of the diversity of the crew. We had Heidi Stephanician Piper. She was our lead spacewalker. She had flown earlier on one flight. She was a Navy diver. Shane Kimbrough, who later did a space station mission. He was an Army helicopter pilot. Eric Bowe, who I ended up flying with twice, he actually was assigned to the Boeing test flight for the commercial crew program, but he's been moved actually to being in charge of the commercial crew program for the astronaut office. Chris Ferguson, he was the commander of the very last shuttle mission as well, and now he's actually on the Boeing flight as the Boeing manager for commercial crew. Don Pettit, who may be the smartest human being I've ever met. Go online. He has some really cool videos from his time in space. I had the opportunity to eat tea with chopsticks on Thanksgiving Day in 2008. And there's a video of that. It's pretty fun. Then there's me, and then there's Sandy Magnus, who is a civilian scientist. And it just gives you a sense of the diversity of the experience that comes to this. We've had doctors, engineers, scientists, veterinarians, we have school teachers, and just a very broad range of professions. So there is no set path to becoming an astronaut. That's sort of the bottom line of that. SAS-126, we brought about 10,000 pounds of equipment up to the space station to turn the space station from a crew of 3 to a crew of 6. And this is Thanksgiving Day, 2008. We're all in the picture. If you look carefully, you can see Fergie's eyes up there. And you can see my right arm back there in the middle. So us and the Russians, we all came over and we had Thanksgiving dinner on the Space Shuttle Endeavour. We also, as I said, we were changing the space station from a crew of 3 to a crew of 6. And so it's like your house, right? So you go to your house, you got to live in your house, you got to make sure you have food, so you make sure you have an oven that works. You want to make sure the air conditioning works. You want to make sure you have a water supply. But in space, the water has to stay there. We were retiring the space shuttle, and the space shuttle used to leave water. It made electricity by combining hydrogen and oxygen. You get water and an electron out of that. The electron we used, the water was waste. So we would just leave all the water we had at space station, and that's what the space station used. When we were retiring the space shuttle, they had to find a way to recycle all the sweat, condensate, and urine on board the space station, and it all gets reused. About 80% efficiency right now, maybe even a little bit higher, that process that they came up with. The interesting thing, it's actually fairly low energy and very efficient process. So it's been modified, and they use it for water projects throughout the world where there has not been a reasonable way of recovering water. This is a great example of a technology that you never would have asked the question if you hadn't been exploring. You know, a lot of times you get the questions, why do we do this? Well, for me, I'm sort of a big engineering guy, and I think that if you can't put yourself in a circumstance you've never been, if you're not asking new questions, new challenging questions, you may not be able to solve problems that you've had forever. Because you have to be able to look at it in a different way. You need to solve this problem, and they say, hey, that might work back here. And I think that's a big thing that space exploration has contributed to society. It doesn't always get accounted for. I also think the biggest contribution has been basically due to the Apollo program and exploring going to the moon. There's an entire generation of engineers and scientists who thought that was really cool. And that's where we all came from. And you look at what's changed technology-wise the past 40 years, it has been absolutely amazing. And it's when we allow ourselves to challenge ourselves to do these things, that change, that improvement is just going to continue. So I'll step off the soapbox for now, and I'll come back to it later. The other thing, another thing on top of the other thing, here it is, the most complicated machine mankind has ever built. 240 miles of space circling the Earth every 90 minutes, operating on solar power. The starboard, I can use the word starboard in port in this audience, I assume. Outstanding. So the starboard solar array, the motor currents are increasing. There's something on the ring, on the race ring of the bearings as it's rolling around. So it's coming to a halt. They're not going to be able to use the starboard solar array anymore. So they challenged the team on the ground to come up with a solution. We work with them as the crew. We're going to go up and do this. So where do they go? They send me outside with a grease gun and a cloth wipe to solve the most technically challenging problem they've had in space. And so we went outside with a grease gun. As a matter of fact, in the very first EVA, we lost a bag. You may have heard about we lost a tool bag. And so I was on one end of the space station. Heidi was heading out to the work site. And so they said, OK, stand by. And I started to work my way back from the front end of space station. And by the time I got to what is called the truss, it's in the center of space station, they said, hey, Steve, go up to the toolbox, get these tools, and go back out to your work site. And they had figured out a way, and actually turned out to be a more efficient way than we had planned to do the work we had to do. We had to lubricate and grease the entire ring, and we had to change out 12 trundle bearings that held the two rings together to allow the space station to recover. The starboard solar array works fine now, thanks to their efforts and that work. And we've lubricated the other side. We found that lubrication is an issue in space too, and we need to keep track of it. But I was just always struck by sometimes the most complicated problems can have really, really simple solutions. So think of that next time you have a problem at home. Maybe if you step back for a second, you can look at it and say, oh, I could just use a grease gun and a cloth wipe. No problem. So I got back from my first mission and went to work. So 90% of your job as an astronaut is not flying in space. It's really supporting those who do. And so I had a great job. I was one of the crew support astronauts that would strap in the crew at the Cape. So I went down, go down to the Cape Kennedy. We'd strap the crew in, get the vehicle sent, launch them on their way. When they landed, we'd be the first people on the shuttle. Great job. And after 9 months of that, I got assigned to another mission, STS-132. STS-132 was the first mission in 10 years where every single crew member had previously flown in space. And the one thing that every single one of us knew was flying in space is a team sport. So Ken Ham, unfortunately, our commander was a Yankees fan, but he knew enough to call the Houston Astros to borrow their stadium. So we invited our crew, invited our training team to Minute Maid Park to get in the picture, basically, to make sure that they knew that we knew that this was a big team sport. And we really appreciate it because a lot of our training team, everybody at NASA has multiple jobs. There was a mission on orbit, so they get off work at 9 o'clock in the morning after working all night, drove downtown to Minute Maid Park, and a fair number of them were actually in the picture with us. And it was just a great day, but it really illustrated the point that when you see a mission in space, they'll show the crew on orbit, and then they'll show mission control. So mission control, you see the one guy looking at a number of screens. What you don't see is we have these back rooms where there's 2, 3, 4, or 5 other people following all the procedures, all the data, all the video to make sure that everything is operating correctly, because it's a very complicated machine and most of the crew operating it is on the ground. So it's a very complicated team sport flying in space. All right, so when I talk to schools, because I think this might apply to other people too, I always ask the kids, they say, who here takes finals? Who's in that age where you take final exams? Okay, right here. When you take a final exam, after you're done with that final exam, like last week, get done with your final exam, what did you do with that information after you wrote it all down?
I stored it in my mind.
You're brilliant. You're set for success. Outstanding. Nobody actually does that. I'm glad you gave that answer, though. What do? You dump it. You get rid of it. I don't need that information anymore. So we land on STS-132, and they say, none of you is ever flying a space shuttle again. Pick up in your Russian studies or leave. So because you're going to go to a space station, you're going to fly on a Soyuz or a commercial crew vehicle, and that's just the way we're doing, because they had already assigned all the last few missions. And so we all started into working on our Russian. And then STS-133, one of the, as I said, we all have other jobs. So for STS-133, I was actually the family support astronaut. In October of 2010, actually Halloween, they were down at the Cape getting ready to launch, and I was driving the families around, making sure they got to all the events, making sure they're supported, because it's very stressful on the families to watch somebody launch on top of a rocket into space for some unknown reason. And my job was to make sure that they were taken care of. And we take that very seriously, and it's a very important job. And they got out to the pad. Well, they actually never made it to the pad. They actually had a hydrogen leak while fueling the space shuttle. And with a hydrogen leak is a bad thing. So they decided we're not going to launch. When we went to defuel the tank, though, the tank failed. So November 2010, STS-133 crew heads back to Johnson Space Center, and they set a new launch date of February 2011. It's actually an amazing engineering story if you look at what they had to do to recover that tank and how quickly they did it. But it's way too, I enjoy it way too much, and you guys would be all asleep. So I'm not going to talk about it that way. But it's a great story if you like engineering. So January of 2011, their lead spacewalker, Tim Kopra, was in a bicycle accident. And so I was head of the EVA branch of the astronaut office, and I got a call from the head of the office, and she said, come in. We have to figure out who's going to take Tim's place for this mission. So I went through all the qualifications for those people still in the office. I came up with 8 names. I said, OK, any of these 8 names, it was actually really simple. I just looked at the qualifications we had set, the bars, and said, OK, who's actually available in here? Oh, there's 8 people. So I made a list of 8 names. And I wrote down to each of those next to those names why this person should be picked. I thought that was the right thing to do, except for one name. Next to my name, I said, don't pick me. I made the list. And then we got through those 8 names. And then we went through another, said, OK, if you pick this group, you got a slightly lower risk, a slightly higher risk of not getting everything done, et cetera, et cetera. So 2 days later, they called me, and they had picked me to take Tim's spot. And yeah, I think they did that just so I couldn't, I don't know. But anyway, 6 weeks to launch. Thank heaven I didn't dump all the information I had learned as well. We had taken our final exam. You're never going to use this information again. So please, when you do take your final exams, remember what they taught you. As I said earlier, the teachers are actually teaching you stuff you might want to remember. And this is exactly why you might want to remember some of that stuff. So I had 6 weeks to come completely back up to speed. Fortunately, Tim had done a fantastic job in putting the spacewalks together and getting the procedures written. I literally changed one thing in both of their spacewalks, and that was I added a camera. And I actually took some pictures on my second spacewalk. So it's just a tremendous lesson learned. Great crew. I actually became an astronaut with most of the rest of this crew. So we had four other crew members that were not the commander. So our commander, Steve Lindsay, he had been head of the office. He was not in my class. However, Mike Barrett, Eric Bowe, who you saw earlier, Alvin Drew and Nicole Stott were all classmates of mine. I'd known them since 2000. We all came in together, and it was just so much fun to fly with them in space. And on orbit, there were 3 Russian crew members, 2 Americans, and an Italian astronaut as well. So it really is an international space station. And it was really a great mission. This was the last flight of the Space Shuttle Discovery. And so this is how we left the space station. This is what it looked like when we left on STS-133. And it's sort of how Space Station looks today. So Space Station has been permanently manned since October of 2000. So basically, as long as 1/3 of the population of the United States has been alive, actually 1/3 of the population of the whole world has been alive, people have been continuously living in space. So once again, when I talk to school children, I have the older people stand up. But in this case, everybody that is born after October of 2000, I think of them as a different species. See, we are the Neanderthals. We may have been like throwing stones at the monument in 2001 sort of thing. We're the Neanderthals. We're the guys that, we didn't know any better. But as long as they have been alive, people have been permanently living in space. And I don't think most people even grasp what that means. That means we are no longer tied entirely to this planet. And what we're learning in space will make life better here on Earth and allow us to explore deeper and deeper into space. It just amazes me when I think of how many people have never known the Earth without somebody being in space. Hopefully it stays that way. And this is our plan for making that happen. So Space Shuttle retires in 2011. Our new plan is to have commercial companies build rockets that will take crew members to space. And why would we do this? Well, this allows NASA basically to focus on exploring deeper into space. And it creates a market, potentially, for people. If you want to buy a ride on a rocket, and go to space. I think Bigelow said 68 million or thereabouts if you want a seat. So if you got a spare $68 million sitting around, you can get a ride. But there are companies and there's research to be done, and that's the real driver. There's reasons to go to space, and there's now going to be a commercial way of doing that. So both Boeing and SpaceX are getting very close to being able to do that. SpaceX flew an unmanned mission to the International Space Station earlier this year, and it went very well. They automatically docked. The vehicle worked really well all the way back. Boeing is going to do the same sort of mission. I think late summer, early fall, they're going to do the same unmanned mission. And they both have their first crewed test flights coming up after that. And soon we'll be able to launch American astronauts, international astronauts from Florida again. And we won't be tied to the Soyuz for our only access to space. And that's really exciting. And those vehicles will be available for companies or entities to purchase to go to space and do their own additional research. And the International Space Station is going to be taking on more commercial research as well. So like I said, we as NASA, we want to focus on reaching beyond low Earth orbit. You know, we're going to go to the moon and then on to Mars, sort of the first baby steps away from our planet. And that vehicle is being designed and built as we speak. We've already done one test flight of the Orion capsule. This was in December 2014. And I came back down and it worked, but we've modified that. We've improved on that. We've developed a plan that's going to get us to the moon. This is the current version of it. But so the first unmanned space flight is 2021. We're looking at 2022 for the first manned crew that will take, and I'll actually take man deeper into space than we've ever gone before. It'll be an orbit well beyond the moon, coming back down. It'll be a free return trajectory for those of you who understand what that means. That means should things go bad on the way out, you're going to come back to Earth. So, I mean, that's a good way to run a test flight. But after that, we're going to go and we're going to orbit the moon. We're going to eventually get back down on the moon. And the idea is to use that outpost. That outpost we're now calling Gateway, established around the moon. It'll be a crew-tended space station orbiting the moon. What that means, we won't be permanently there. We'll be permanently at the space station, hopefully continuing to do research. But we'll use the moon as a place to do additional research that requires the environment out there, and also to help us explore the moon. But that's where we're heading. All right, there's that first mission I told you about. This is what the vehicle will probably look like that takes us there. That'll be the Orion capsule and the SLS, the Space Launch System, and that will get us to beyond low Earth orbit. So, I mentioned space station earlier, and sun's coming out, so it means it might be a less cloudy night. Unfortunately, you won't be able to see space station here until the 27th of June. So you have this great opportunity. Has anybody ever seen space station fly overhead? It looks like a really bright star. It's really cool. And there's people up there living and not enjoying the food. They do have a really good view. The food's okay, but yours is probably better. So I usually like to take food outside with me and wave it at them. So if you're down here in New Bedford, we've got some good opportunities to see space station. And what you're actually seeing is space station is in sunlight and you're in darkness. So this will happen either right after sunset or right before sunrise. And unfortunately, I think all of these are really early in the morning. 4:30 in the morning, 3:30 in the morning. And this one here, this maximum height of 87 degrees means that's going to be straight overhead. And this is called, the website, there's a lot of websites that do this. I get this one from Sightings. And it'll tell you, you can take it and anytime, any day, you can check to see if the space station's flying overhead. And some of them are at more reasonable hours, like 9:30 at night. But 3:30 in the morning is definitely an opportunity on July 2nd, if you're still up. And so this is us. And that was we took this on SDS-132. So what I have a video that I would like to show to wake you all up since I've bored you all to tears. And I'll get that up right now. And there's a few things I have to tell you about the video. First thing is, we don't spend a third of our time goofing off in space. The second thing is, don't try this at home, because you're going to see us do things I definitely cannot do here on Earth. And for the children out there, only astronauts are allowed to play with food. Don't feel obligated to try this at home.